Welcome everybody to the second day of Behes Gurgaon Round. We are with the two teams who have qualified for the semi-finales of this round of Behes. May I invite the first speaker from the proposition to open the team's case for us?
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, can I start the debate?
Yes, please begin.
So, good morning, one and all. I, Raghav Verma, am going for the motion and strongly feel that there is a need for developing a universal language for the world. A universal common language, according to ResearchGate, in the future will promote commonness, shortness, diversity, distinctiveness, simplicity, cultural association, and compound interests. The present world in which we live in is a period of increased technological advances and new ideas that will continue to keep improving. With these improvements, a universal language is going to be very beneficial. But wait, yes, I'm going to justify myself through the following points. Point number one, rapid globalization. Trade, commerce, and business will continue to increase. Through increasing globalization is beneficial to the world and the society. It will also create numerous problems. One key factor for globalization is communication. Without communication, trading between countries would be a difficult state. Since there are multiple languages that are spoken around the world, communicating with other countries can be a hassle. Although there are many different languages spoken around the world, one language is undoubtedly a more efficient way of communication. One universal language can ease the process of business, trade, and commerce and other activities involving communication. There wouldn't be a need for translating what other countries are trying to communicate across the globe. My next point is that most languages that you aren't familiar of are not easy to understand just by glancing. With one language, there wouldn't be a confusion in different areas of the world that attract foreigners and tourists and thus foreigners and tourists can easily obtain languages about what they have visited. And thus, tourism is going to increase at a rapid scale, which will contribute to inevitable higher GDP of the developing nations, which is very beneficial for a country like ours. I would like to draw more light by through some of the following points. English is one of the most known languages in the world, and English is the most common language worldwide. For air traffic control in the airports, English is the only one language spoken. Statistics show that English is the easiest language to learn compared to French, German, and Spanish. 80% of the communication and the information we find on the internet is English, and internet is one of the most common sources of information in the world. English is one of the most studied language across the world. English is a language that is capable of turning into the world's universal language. A very common point through which we can all relate to is that our younger generation feels the pressure especially strongly. Televisions and movies and OTT platforms like Netflix and Prime send a message that discourages the maintenance of the community values, inviting young viewers to join a more glamorous and a more commercialized world. The fact that language genocide of a particular language is taking place every few weeks further justifies our point that people are becoming more and more commercialized, advanced, and modern, and slowly progressing towards a unified, common global language which will stimulate the world's growth and expansion the world has never witnessed before. I would thus like to rest my case and challenge all the opponents who believe otherwise, and my fellow mate Srishti will further elaborate on this point. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Raghav, for that wonderful start to the debate. We shall now wait a minute before we move on to the first speaker of the opposition. May I now call upon the first speaker of the opposition to open the team's case for us?
Yes, thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, you're perfectly audible.
Nice. Ma'am, can I start?
Please do.
Good morning, dear adjudicator and my worthiest opponents. Today, as we know, the motion before the Houses is that we should develop a universal language for the world. Now, what is universal language? Universal language may refer to a hypothetical or historical language spoken and understood by almost all of the world's population. In some contexts, it refers to a means of communication said to be understood by all humans. It may be the idea of an international auxiliary language or for communication between groups speaking different primary languages, or in other conceptions, it may be the primary language of all speakers or the only existing language. There have been actually various attempts at creating a universal language. The most famous one is called the Esperanto, but it turns out that for many reasons, we'll probably never have a universal human language. You can probably take a stab at a few of the reasons, and you'd be correct. Language is culture. Not everyone has the internet, which would presumably be used to disseminate a universal language. Not everyone gets to agree on everything, and agreeing everyone is difficult. Politics is complicated, etc. What I'm saying is it's not hard to see why we still have languages, but it is not the end of the column. There are technical, scientific, and cultural factors that are instructive in exploring why humans and Earth are currently structured aren't well suited to have universal languages. Now, taking India as an example, here we all know how much diverse our country is, and the amount of religion followed here are created for a total of 22 languages recognized by the Constitution and 9 different religions followed by India, creating a large diversity. Also, not many people in India speak certain languages as their first language. Therefore, speaking in a specific language won't be easy for them to communicate, even if it is for trade. Now, if we consider speaking Hindi as a language, it will be very difficult for the people living in rural areas or people who don't really speak Hindi as a first tongue for communicating, and will also, disrupt our diversity, and also, will be a problem for them to understand it. And even if they choose to learn it, it won't be easy for them. As you see, they don't even have enough money to feed their family. How are they going to afford to learn a whole new language? Who will, teach all those? How will the government arrange so many tutors to, make a world, let's just say a specific state or a specific village to understand one language? I would thus like to end my speech with the conclusion that creating a universal language will create problems for a lot and is not feasible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mudit. That was a wonderful start to the case of the opposition. We shall now wait a minute again before we move on to the second speaker of the proposition. May I now call upon the second speaker from the proposition to expand on the team's case for us?
Yes, ma'am, just a minute. Yeah. Good morning, respected adjudicator, my fellow mates, and my dear opponents. Today, I, Srishti Gupta, will be speaking from the affirmative side of the motion that we should develop a universal language for the world. Language plays a very important role in our lives and expression. They develop the theory of mind, expression of thoughts, leading to basic existence of human beings, giving them purpose and removing ambiguity. The world today has a huge diversity in opinions, thoughts, cultures, traditions, religions, and languages. We meet different people speaking different languages. The world today is turning into a global village. Technology is making the world stay connected with each other. These connections can be made more stronger and efficient by introducing the idea of one language. Now, the opposition might say that the idea of universal language is rather a more colonialistic approach. However, a colonialistic approach is not only about one language, it's about many other ideologies which are imposed on a different community, leading to drawbacks. With a universal language, people would be able to speak to one another across the world without a language barrier to hinder communications. Though this matter may be simple, many fields that interact on an international level would greatly benefit from this. One benefit for universal language is international trade. Due to this importance of many trade agreements and contracts, simple translation errors can cause companies to lose millions of dollars. Such was the case in 2005, where a translation of a Chinese paper into English caused panic among the economic world. The Washington Post states the traders instantly dumped US dollars and bought any Asian currency they could lay their hands on. Though the situation was quickly resolved, the mistranslation almost caused permanent damage in the economic world. Having a global language could help in preventing this form of miscommunication. As far as culture and our roots are considered, the idea of using a global language doesn't mean we're getting detached from our own roots. Moreover, I believe there is a relation between globalization and the usage of an universal language such as English. As my fellow mate Raghav said, English is being widely used around the world. If you count native and second language speakers, and it is spoken by 1.1 billion people, that means that one in every seven people on earth speak English to some degree. Various multinational companies in the world are laying strategies for their employees to communicate in English language. According to Nation Master, if we look at GDP figures, the Anglosphere are countries that have English as an official or de facto official language accounts for $22.11 trillion or 25% of the global gross domestic product. Further, this number doesn't account for the other 70 some odd countries where English is also co-official or de facto official. But this number proves that English is the language of business and that English-speaking countries drive the global economy. However, this is not only about English. This is about making and building up one particular universal language. Further, can you imagine how much easier scholarship or travel or business would be if we all just spoke English or any other language? Think of how much time and energy could it be saved. As my opponent Mudit said, that not everyone has the internet and not that everyone can afford it. But you're limiting yourself to the discussion by assumption that the use of internet and globalization would not increase. Globalization as a fact is bound to increase in the future years, and thus, since there is a need for universal language in the future years, it is going to become a necessity. And here I rest my case by saying that there is a need of a universal language. Thank you.
Thank you, Shrishti, for that wonderful expansion on the case of the proposition.
Thank you,
We
ma'am.
will wait a minute before we move on to the second speaker of the opposition. May I now call upon the second speaker from the opposition to carry forward the case for us?
Yeah. Should I start?
Yes, please begin whenever you're ready.
The world has hundreds of different languages with different rules of grammar, word combinations, and most importantly, phonetic differences. There's a few examples of phonetic differences from some major languages. In German, the usage of der Umlaut, a unique punctuation mark, and the unique character der SZ. Or in Spanish, you have the unique characters signo de apertura, de explanación y interrogación. Or how Mandarin speakers can't pronounce English sounds like th, et, and the long e sound. Do you know why all this happens, respected proposition? Because the people who use these languages can't physically pronounce it because their accents, their phonetic features have evolved over thousands of years. Mandarin, Latin, and Nahati are some of the oldest languages. But the problem is that European languages are mostly based on Latin and East Asian languages. Um, for example, in traditional Mandarin, uh, the for example, in case of traditional Mandarin and Latin, these two languages developed in complete isolation from each other over hundreds of years, over centuries, over even millennia. Then tell me, proposition, how do you develop a language overnight, which is feasible enough for people from across the world, for 7.6 billion people to use, without being inadequate in terms of grammar or vocabulary? And that's not to mention the cost in terms of human life, cost in terms of time, cost in terms of money, cost in terms of the bureaucratic nightmare it's going to be. Think about it. As my first speaker said, you cannot teach people this overnight. It is going to take years, if not decades, to teach that many people this hypothetical language. And even say you do develop a language, even say you do teach that many people this language. Imagine the cost. Imagine the logistical nightmare it would be to provide information to so many people. And all this for what? The world is doing just fine with the languages we have now, with the trade agreements we have now. There's errors everywhere in the world, but that doesn't mean you entirely throw them out, right? First figure of proposition. You talked about how English is the easiest language relative to Spanish and French. So you're speaking that as a person learning English for years. If you're, say, an Arabic speaker or someone who uses Mandarin or Japanese, then it is an absolute nightmare to learn English. Arabic speakers generally require 1100 hours of dedicated study to properly learn English, and East Asian speakers require 2200 hours. The ease of learning English or any other Romance or Latin language depends directly on how closely your native language resembles that language. It does not depend on if you have the will to do it or if you have the resources to do it. It is about how languages have evolved over thousands of years. Your brain cannot just change overnight regarding these phonetic differences. And second speaker of proposition, ma'am, trade errors happen all the time due to all sorts of errors. Doesn't need you entirely throw them out, right? For example, um, in the past decade, Maine lower court made a mistake in a case regarding trucking and shipping of food, meat, and fish due to a grammar error where the Maine constitution forgot to put a comma. But that does not mean you entirely remove all sorts of punctuations from the constitution, right? That's just not how it works. Similarly, if there is, say, a loss of $1 million on a trade agreement, sure, it's bad, but is it really worth it to replace it with billions of dollars of nightmarish logistical problems and costs that would come with making an entirely new language or how to teach these languages? And with that, I'd like to end my speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Deshu, for that wonderful expansion on your case. We will wait a minute before we move on to the third speaker from the proposition, the last speaker for the team. Can we now have the third and the last speaker from the team proposition?
May I start?
Yes, please begin.
It is estimated that there were approximately 10,000 spoken languages, which are narrowed down to 7,000 in past few centuries. Have you wondered why? The main reason is people evolve, and so do language. Common language is the most obvious binding element of any society. For example, Behes. Here, we all are together, expressing our views in English and not any different language. Why? Just for ease, just to reduce any sort of misunderstandings. History has shown how catastrophic linguistic diversities can be. Partition of countries, partition of states, genocides, riots, civil wars, and what not, be it Sri Lanka or France, German or India. Let's take example of English. Nearly 1.4 billion people speak English language, which is equivalent to population of India. Now imagine how great and beneficial it would have been for Indians if every person spoke the same language. No difference in caste, no stereotypes for English being the language of educated society, no more depression. Everyone confident and raising for their own rights. Sharing a common language helps you boost your confidence. Stand for your right. It is statistically shown that developed countries share a common language and not any different language, just for the ease and just for unification. Why do you think UN has only 6 languages and not 196 languages for every different countries? Speaker 2, I would like to make you familiar with the term Indian English, the English with Indian accent, where you don't have to pay attention on the phonics. You have an English for yourself. Language is one's identity, and creating a universal language is creating a universal identity, where the citizen will forget all these creed of caste, all the hatred of religion, and will be together creating a universal identity, a unified state, and an hypothetical euphoria. I rest my case supporting that we should develop a universal language. Thank you.
Thank you, Riddhi, for that wonderful close to the case of the proposition. We will now wait a minute before we move on to the last speaker of the debate.
I can start. I'm ready.
All right, please begin. Please begin if you're ready.
Okay. Feelings or emotions are the universal language and are to be honored. They are the authentic expression of who you are at your deepest place. A very hearty good afternoon to one and all present here. Today, I, P.U. Arora, the third speaker of the opposition team, strongly stand against the motion before the House today, which states that we should develop a universal language for the world. If everyone speaks one language, that basically encourages people to forget their roots and part of their culture. Our language is who we are, our diverse and vast culture. There are approximately 6,500 languages still alive. And imagine all of these 6,500 languages disappearing, and one of them is yours. We could positively destroy cultural diversity. Not to mention, it would not even work. thousands of people would have to learn that so-called global language. For instance, if we were to have a global language, the world powers would have one more tool in their arsenal. And I also said in my last debate, we have already 23 major languages in India and Hindi as the common language. Add one more global language on top of that, what type of confusion are you trying to create? We know that people communicate more ideas with their language. Colonialism, statalism have led to a decline in the number of languages from the peak of 10,000 to 6,000 today. In other words, the world does not really need a universal language. If the world language was it would take away from the individuality and different countries and their various cultures. Our language is our identity to tell people where we come from. It would be the same argument in every country. France would say they want French to be the global language, while British would say they want English to be the global language. Being around people who speak different languages sparks type of adventure and fun in people. For rebuttals, this also the language, the only reason I speak English language and many others in my country is because my country was invaded, colonized, and my native language suppressed. It wasn't for linguistic reasons that the English dominated, but political. For rebuttals, the first speaker said we should learn a new language and it would make our trade better and for communication. And the second and the third speaker went on and on about trade and language and communication, which would also we are talking about first, second, and third speaker said we should make English a global language. We're talking about a global language, not English as a global language. But just for your information, only 30% of people, which makes 3,022 million people, speak English every day as one language. And what about the other 70%? Losing a language equals losing identity. The language is more than just a tool for communication. Again, it's a part of who we are and represents our cultural background. The second speaker said the idea of using global language doesn't destroy cultural roots. Let me tell you, ma'am, that is exactly what it does. That one global language, you keep using that global language because it's global and you use it to communicate with people. And then you forget where your roots are, you forget which your original language was. The second speaker also said about English being made global language and being used as majority of the language. If English was made global language, it would be lack of innovation. If a single language is made a global language throughout the world, it would mean that innovation and growth would be no longer. Every language has its own dialects and they would stop being made. Again, the third speaker said we're having Behes in English. I told you it was our country was colonized. It was not our choice. It was not political, but our native language was suppressed. The third speaker also said there would be no more depression or stereotypes or racism if we made one common language. How do you think that having one common language could possibly change that? Would it automatically change that if we have one common language? I don't know which fairy tale world you are living in, ma'am, but that is not possible. The third speaker also said a language is one's identity. Universal language is universal identity. Ma'am, our identity is special and it makes us who we are. Universal identity is not really a good idea. I would like to rest my case here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pihu, for that wonderful close to our debate. We are done with all 6 speakers of the semi-finale of Behes Gurgaon Round. That is all for the viewers of our live debate. I will request all